Hey everyone, Chris here with another filler episode, and I just want to start by saying that I never really intended for these filler episodes to be strictly about DOS-related things. The first four just happened to turn out that way. I mostly want to use these filler episodes to talk about things that aren't related to DOS games, because really, DOS games only represent a fraction of the games I have. I mean, look at all these. I have over 200 console and portable games spanning over a dozen different systems, none of them having anything to do with Windows or DOS. Though, I do have to admit that 200 games really isn't that many for the average collector, but I don't exactly have a lot of disposable income, so I don't get many opportunities to expand upon it. Today, though, there's one specific thing I want to talk about. The Nintendo Entertainment System. Also called the NES, or as I like to call it, the NES. However you want to pronounce it, the NES was a fantastic and iconic gaming system. The only drawback is that it had an incredibly high temporary failure rate. More often than not, you'd put a game into that Nintendo, turn the power on, and then you'd get, well, this. Or a blank screen, or a flashing brown screen, or worse. So why exactly does the Nintendo fail so often? Well, to understand why, you first have to understand that most cartridge-based systems are top loaders. What this means is you have a slot on the top, you have your cartridge, stick the cartridge in, there you go. Well, okay, it's a little more complicated than that because it usually goes in so far. That's when the connectors in the cart meet the pins in the system, and then you have to wiggle it and force it down the rest of the way. Then there you go. The NES, on the other hand, is a side loader, and you stick the cartridge in, but doing this only makes contact with the top pins. Then you have to push it down to lock it into place. Who thought that was a good idea? That's like the stupidest way they could have designed this thing. By not having that wiggling that you get with the top-loading systems, you're not dislodging the microscopic pieces of dust and debris that are preventing a solid connection. Let me demonstrate. First, let's put the game in. Gyromite, what the heck was I doing playing that? Yeah, it's not working. Though, one common solution while I was growing up was to actually blow on the cartridge connectors. But let's be honest, that doesn't do anything. I'll even prove it. Yeah, that doesn't work. At least not properly. But yeah, the thing is that blowing on the cartridge doesn't work, and I've actually noticed that more recently people have gone so far as to actually perform surgery on their NES. Either bending the pins up inside to make a stronger connection, or replacing the pin assembly entirely. I've never had to do that for the 20 years plus that I've owned this thing for. So what's my solution? Watch this. Works almost every time. So what exactly am I doing? Well, because the best way to get the cartridge working is to wiggle it to get rid of all that microscopic dust and debris that's in the way, that's what you gotta do, is you gotta wiggle the cartridge while it's in the system. It's like this. You put the cartridge in the system, push it down, and I'm grabbing what little protrusions I can and just wiggling it backwards as best I can and then pushing it forwards, all without accidentally pushing it down and releasing the lock, because if you do that, then you gotta start over. And as long as your control deck and your carts are clean, should work almost every time. Now, in terms of actually cleaning these things, if you don't have an actual cleaning kit, then cleaning the NES, you basically have to take it apart and clean the pins by hand. But cleaning the carts is really easy. Just take a Q-tip, wet one end with water, rub it against both sides of the contacts, then flip the Q-tip, rub it against both sides, the dry end, and there you go, clean cartridge. Though you may have to do this a few times if the cartridge is really dirty, and some people will actually go as far as to recommend rubbing alcohol, but that will eventually wear down the contacts. So use rubbing alcohol once if you absolutely must, but never again. Though, despite doing all of this, you might still run into games that are just stubborn. Like, I mean, here. A good example of this is DuckTales. This is actually my third DuckTales cartridge, because they run into this issue where half the time you'll put it into the system, you'll turn it on, and you'll get these garbled graphics on screen, and it's always garbled in the exact same way. It's almost like these cartridges just weren't manufactured that well. Though another issue you might run into has to do specifically with unlicensed titles, such as Fantasy Zone. Fantasy Zone. See, the problem with Fantasy Zone and other Tengen games in particular is that they have this ramped edge going on, so you can't really grasp any part of it while it's inside the NES. But that's okay, because you do actually have one other option if you can't use the wiggle trick. Game Genie. I'm serious. You just take your Game Genie, put your cartridge on it, wiggle it on, wiggle the whole thing into your control deck, and there you go. Should work almost just as well. And you even get the added benefit of being able to use Game Genie codes. And Game Genie is actually really easy to find if you don't have one. And if you can get them used for under $8, or you can even find them new, full with the box manual and everything for about $15 to $18. They're really easy to find. And that's pretty much all I have to say about the NES. I mean, I know some of you are probably going to email me and say, I already knew how to do that, or that's common knowledge, everybody knows how to do that. But that's not my experience. I generally run into people who blow on their cartridges continually or clean them repeatedly, and they can't understand why they can't get their game working. So, it's not as common knowledge as you might think it is. But now that you've seen this video, you no longer have an excuse to blow on your cartridges. So don't. Otherwise I'm going to kill you with my Sega Master System Death Phaser! So please don't blow on your cartridges anymore. Instead, use a Game Genie or the wiggle trick. Anyways, what else did I wanted to give a quick shout out to a fellow web show artist who recently gave a shout out to me, so I figured I'd do the same in return. His name is Clint Basinger, and most of you probably know him by his web show Lazy Game Reviews. And you can find his website at www.lazygamereviews.com. Or, since his website's still pretty new, you probably want to go to his YouTube page instead, which is at www.youtube.com/user/freaking-d, which I just have to admit, this is an awesome username. He mostly does reviews of classic games and hardware, though he does do some modern games and hardware as well, and our review styles are they're kind of similar. If you like my stuff, you'll certainly like his. I recommend you check out his review of Extreme Rock Climbing, because he has this running joke that started with that one. His evolution of PC audio is a real treat to the ears. And I recommend you also check out his top 17 worst PC games, because by some strange coincidence, he actually picked a lot of the same games I would have. So yeah, go check him out. As for the next episode of Ancient DOS Games, I have a great hint for all of you. It's an artillery game. It has 2 different kinds of nukes. It allows up to 10 players at once, but it does not have parachutes. Well, I bet that threw a bunch of you off, didn't it? Well, if you still think you know what game it is, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and make sure you tune in next Saturday to see the game in action. Speaking of action, it's time to play some Guardian Legend. I love this game. Just a little bit of an extra here. I was just looking at my Sega Death Phaser, and I was just noticing that it says made in China. No wonder my last 4 of these things exploded on me.